Hello, I'm Helen Walters, Editor of Innovation and Design at Business Week, and welcome to another round of 5 Questions 4, in which we put reader questions to an executive we've lured into Business Week. On the hot seat today, Tim Brown of IDEO, an innovation and design consultancy headquartered in California with offices all over the world. As CEO of the company, Tim works with companies such as Procter & Gamble and Microsoft, and IDEO is one of the few innovation consultancies to have featured on Business Week's annual list of the most innovative companies. Tim is a keen proponent of the discipline of design thinking and is a regular speaker and attendee at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
So let's go right into our reader questions. We had a lot of them, and they're really great, but I culled it to 5. And the first comes from Paulo Passeri from Brazil, who asks, how can I bring design thinking into my organization? How can I make my peers understand it and work as design thinkers?
So I think the only way you ultimately get to understand it is by doing it, which of course is a useless answer, because how do you do it if you're going to understand it? The first step,
maybe define it for us.
Well, I mean, defining it, I think, is about taking design methodologies, the way designers work, and applying them to whatever problems you might have within a business. And I think there are probably 3 really important steps to take, maybe 4. The first one is you've got to think of everything as a project. I mean, what designers do when they approach problems is they turn them into projects. And the reason they do that is it bounds them in some sort of finite way, and it allows them to explore often a very, very diverse space, but within some set of constraints. So step number 1 is turn your problems into projects. Step number 2 is go look at the world for insights instead of just imagining you already know what all the choices are that you have available. I mean, the thing that design thinking does that perhaps is different from the way most business folks think is that it explores new choices. It creates new choices to make. Whereas I think many business people come out of business school and think, okay, my job is to take all of the available choices, decide which is the right one, and go ahead and kind of converge on that solution. What we do as design thinkers is to say, no, well, maybe there are better choices out there. We just haven't figured them out yet. So the way to get to those better choices is to go look for insights out in the world, whether that be your customers, whether it be kind of consumers out in the world, whether it be things that are going on that are interested in terms of technology or other business, whatever they might be, go and get your insights from the outside, not just from the inside. And then the third thing is make your ideas tangible. And we generally talk about that as prototyping. I mean, how do I take an idea that I've got and make it tangible, make it real, so that I can understand how good it is as quickly as possible? Don't take months to come up with your first prototype, which might be your real business or your real process or whatever it might be. Go figure out how you can make a prototype in a day or a week and test it in the real world somehow, whether it's on your colleagues if it's an internal process that you're designing, or whether it's on consumers if it's some kind of product or service.
So keep iterating.
Keep iterating. Make ideas tangible as quickly as you can. And I said maybe the 4th thing that's important is your ability to tell stories about your ideas. Ideas generally fail inside organizations because people don't understand them, they don't get behind them, and they often fail long before they get to the marketplace. And your ability to tell stories about your ideas, and prototypes are very useful to do that, by the way. Your ability to tell stories about your ideas is crucial, in my opinion, if you want your ideas to actually get executed and ultimately have impact. And that's really the only point in doing design, is to have impact in the world.
So does that mean that you have to have kind of groups within the company? How do you take your company with you? I think that's part of the question that Paolo is asking.
Well, I think if you get used to using those kinds of processes to explore your ideas, you'll soon find that you've got teams of folks who are used to exploring new ideas, making them real, and getting them out through the organization. It's kind of it's almost a culture that you need to build in order to make design thinking effective inside an organization. Now, my approach to that would be start with a small group of people, get them used to the idea. If you like, think of training the trainers. And then sort of have those folks go out across the organization as much as possible and teach this approach to different people. We've certainly done that with many organizations that aren't kind of creative organizations by definition, people like healthcare organizations, manufacturers, things like that, where we've taught folks how to lead design thinking projects, and then they've gone off and taught other people how to do that.
So you kind of plant the right people throughout the organization and then watch as it kind of spirals
and be
there.
Patient, because it's a relatively slow process to infiltrate a whole culture.
Yeah, of course. Great. So the second question is also on design thinking, a little broader question from M. Shears, who says there's a lot of talk about the need to rebuild America's infrastructure. How can design or design thinking help build an infrastructure that is future-oriented, evolves with use, is adaptable, flexible, secure, and rebuilds America's competitive advantage?
Well, I think personally, the first step is to think about infrastructure a little differently from the way that we thought about infrastructure perhaps in the 50s when we were building freeways or, nationwide telephone systems or whatever we have thought of as being infrastructure in the past. And indeed, there has been a huge investment, of course, in infrastructure in the last 10 or 15 years in terms of our digital infrastructure, which, in my opinion, is one of the things that does allow a country to be adaptable and agile and to grow and be flexible. And there is some concern in my mind that the US is kind of getting behind some other parts of the world in terms of our digital infrastructure. So I would certainly encourage more investment in that. But I think as much as anything, our infrastructure is about our capacity as a culture and as an economy to change. And so one place I would be doing a lot of investment if it were me would be in education. I believe education is probably our most important piece of infrastructure, and there are too many signs that in the US we're slipping behind, and that we have too narrow a view of what education might be in order to encourage growth in the future. For instance, I'm concerned that when government talks about innovation, all they think about is science and technology, and yet innovation crosses the complete spectrum of everything we do in government, in institutions, and in industry and business. And so we ought to be looking at all of those aspects that support innovation, not just science and technology, whether it be design, like the field that I come from, or it be other forms of kind of innovation-based thinking. So I would be doing lots of investment in education if it were me.
And should this be publicly driven or should this be privately driven, or kind of a
I think it's got to be a combination of both. I mean, I think a great form of investment would be to kind of kickstart lots of private institutions to build their capacity, whether it be private universities, whether it be high schools, whatever it might be, as well as public.
Okay, the third question comes from Stephen Allard in South Korea. With the end of the British Empire and now what looks to be the end of the American economic empire, how do you see design thinking taking root in the next economic growth engine?
I think it already is. We've had a base in China for a little while now. We're seeing domestic Chinese companies who have got the ambition to be global brands and who are looking to develop their products and their services, the experiences that their products deliver in the marketplace, the way that they market, to innovate around all of those and to grow those. And we're seeing a lot of interest from Chinese service brands, even though that they're kind of emerging. We don't tend to think of China as being a service culture, and it perhaps isn't in the same way that India is, which, by the way, I think India is another driver for global growth. And there's an intense interest in design thinking in India. I think I must get an email every week from somebody there who wants to start an educational institution around it or a company that's interested in it. So I think the combination of China and India being kind of determined to build globally effective companies, willing to experiment, willing to learn from everything that's already happened in Europe and the US, could mean for some pretty exciting things.
Not make the same mistakes. That
well, they're bound to make some of the same mistakes, but I think but will leapfrog. I mean, already one of the things we're seeing, for instance, in China is sort of interdisciplinary education beginning to emerge, perhaps kind of spearheaded in places like Hong Kong, Singapore, obviously not China itself, but amazing education system getting built in Singapore. And we're starting to see an interest in that sort of cross-disciplinary education in China. It took a long time for the American and the European institutions to get to that.
How big is IDEO's office in China?
We're quite small. I think we have about 35 people. But we're learning. I mean, it was tough for the first couple of years, but as we kind of learned about the culture and but
you're
now
learning too.
Well, that's why we're there. I mean, there's little point in going somewhere in the world if you're not going to learn about the place you're in.
Good point. So the fourth question comes from Saul Kaplan, who is so keen that you should answer his question that he's submitted both via the blog and via Twitter. So I thought that I'd better pick his question. And he asks, with the half-life of business models decreasing, how do organizations develop an R&D capability for new business models?
I'm not sure I completely agree that the half-life of business models is decreasing. I think there are certain business models that while not being universal, perhaps will continue to be valid. I agree that there's a lot of experimentation in business models that doesn't always work out so well, just like there's experimentation in all forms of innovation. But I suppose to answer the question, I would say that the first step is to get business folks comfortable with the idea of innovation. And it comes back to what I was saying a little earlier, which is that the way to develop new ideas is to create new choices, to be divergent in your thinking and not convergent in your thinking. So we need to encourage business schools to encourage divergent thinking and creative thinking, if you like. Now, we're certainly finding many more business school graduates, for instance, these days, very interested in innovation. And we've had lots come to IDEO who are wonderful divergent thinkers and who are doing business model innovation. And I think we'll see this as a kind of a growing movement as we realize that our existing choices that we have as business people limit our ability to innovate, limit our ability to differentiate ourselves, and are available to everybody on the planet. And so the only way to kind of create differentiation is to make new choices somehow, and that's, I believe, through divergent thinking.
Okay, the final question is a huge topic, but it comes from Susan Kuhn-Frost, who asks, how do you see green design helping the economy in a recession?
Well, I think much like one or two folks have said out publicly recently, including Barack Obama, I think that there's almost no doubt in my mind that that environmental technologies and the green kind of movement, the need to be massively more efficient in the way that we use energy and resources is probably the biggest opportunity for innovation business has ever seen. And I think Arnold Schwarzenegger the other day was arguing that for California this is a tremendous opportunity. That in fact introducing kind of more kind of regulations or goals for environmental kind of regulations is actually going to create more of an economic opportunity for California, and I think I would agree with him. I think it's huge, and I'm delighted to see more and more businesses thinking about how do we innovate in the green space. I'm seeing government doing the same thing. One of the issues that I see around the environmental issues are that conservation is every bit as important as new technology, and we're only just beginning to, certainly in America, just beginning to get our heads around the idea of every one of us as consumers, conserving energy. There's a lot of help that business and government could give each one of us by offering us new products, offering us new services, offering us new ways of thinking and measuring the energy we use. It's just a huge opportunity.
Wonderful. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Helen Walters, Editor of Innovation and Design. This was 5 Questions for Tim Brown from IDEO. Thanks for joining us.